We all have routines. I'm Jabron, and with diabetes, mine was finger sticks. Sometimes I skip them because they hurt. The Freestyle Libre 3CGM changed that. It gives me glucose insights without finger sticks. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
Finger sticks are required if your glucose alarms or readings do not match symptoms, or when you see check blood glucose symbol for the first 12 hours. The views expressed should not be used for medical diagnosis or treatment as a substitute for professional medical advice. Individual circumstances may vary. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
Looking for music that lifts your spirit and fills your heart? Experience the powerful sound of the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. Now streaming on all your favorite music platforms. Find the Tabernacle Choir on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Amazon Music, and Pandora. Let the music of the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square inspire you today and every day. Whether you're at home, in the car, or on the go, enjoy the beauty of their world-renowned sound anytime. The Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square, streaming now.
Is right here. This is Scotty G and the coach, Tim LaCombe, on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Hey, John Marino back with the Utah Mammoth. Never left. 8-year contract extension. It's a big one, and he will remain a member of the Mammoth. Joining us now, Mammoth NHL insider Cole Bagley, kind enough to join us. Cole, how are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Was this always a foregone conclusion that they were going to find a way to get this thing done? Yeah,
for sure. I think, any time that you can find a player who's, as reliable as John Marino is and has, such, high quality statistical, numbers and is willing to stick around for the long haul, I think you got to lock those types of players up, and that's exactly what Utah did today.
Off-season moves have been aplenty. Definitely felt like they had attacked things they needed to attack, but we just had Bill Armstrong on, and he said, looking around, he's feeling like the guys are feeling like, it's time. These guys, it feels like management believes. What's your thought on all the good things Mammoth?
Yeah, I think this has been an incredible summer for them. When you look at all the areas that they were lacking in a year ago, I think what they did this offseason was, really do a deep dive on, where they needed to improve the most. And, what Bill told me is that, that series against Vegas played a major role in, how they, looked at what they needed to work on and what areas that they needed to improve. And that's exactly what they did with all of these moves, right? From, the Trocheks and the Anders Lees, up front to be more, sound in front of the net, to be more physical, to play a grittier style, and to be able to compete not only, more effectively in the regular season, but as well in playoffs when, grit and physicality are at a premium. That's what they were able to do amongst their forwards, and they were able to find their backup goaltender in Sebastian Kosa, a position that they've been searching for over the last two seasons, ever since things kind of went south with Connor Ingram and wanting to kind of lighten Vejmelka's load. They were able to find a young goaltender that they've long since coveted and believed in. They did incredibly well, I think, in the draft with the picks that they had, and now locking up a guy in John Marino, who is one of the key cornerstones of their blue line. I think that this has been a very productive offseason, and one that is going to not only help them reach their goal of 100 points in the regular season, but they might even win a series or two in the playoffs.
The thing that I think is fascinating is that you got Marino on an 8-year contract, which is just a massive amount of years. But in talking to Bill Armstrong, he mentioned, okay, he may be in his late 20s, but also he hasn't played a lot of NHL games. There's still a ton of tread on those tires in terms of NHL experience. So obviously short term, he's worth a ton. Do you worry about year 5, 6, 7 of that contract?
Not really. He'll be, he's 29, so he'll be 37 going on 38 by the end of the contract. But, similar to Nick Schmaltz's deal, what they've done with these contracts is they've front loaded them. They've made the contracts, the first couple of years more expensive with a higher AAV, and then it lessens as you go on. I mean, I think years 1 through 4, according to Puckpedia, years 1 through 4 will be about $8 million AAV, and then it drops to $6 million in years 5 and 6, and then down to $5 million in years 7 and 8. And so I think what Bill and his front office have done really well is with these guys, they're in their later 20s, early 30s, the ones that they're bringing back for, max term extensions, they're making those contracts tradable as you get into the later years. They're not putting themselves in a situation where you're not going to be able to move that contract, especially considering the fact that, the cap is continuing to rise. I think a guy like John Marino, with his production, with how good he is and sound he is defensively, I think, in a couple of years from now when they're paying him, into that $6 million, $5 million range, that's going to be a steal. And, potentially, it's going to be a contract that should be pretty easy to move, if they get down the road and the team continues to evolve.
So we just talked about it. They went out, got more veteran, as you mentioned, added a solid backup goalie that can now develop, another big dude that in the cage. Is there any piece now that you feel like, they need to address, or is the addressing now just playing and learning together and developing that chemistry?
I'm interested to see. I mean, this is the one area that is a little bit concerning for me is their third pairing defensively. They moved on from Ian Cole, who is now in Chicago. They traded Sean Durzi, and so right now, who's going to fulfill that third pairing on Utah's blue line? Is it Dmitry Simashev and Maverick Lamoureux? Is it Peak? Is it Nick DeSimone? And not that those guys aren't capable, but I do think that in terms of experience and games played and veteran leadership, they're definitely taking a step back in that position. Now I think it's kind of a trade-off, right? I mean, they're able to stack themselves more in terms of offense. They're able to add some very sound, very talented, very physical forwards in Trocheck and Lee, as we've already talked about. But there is some concern, in my opinion, about the amount of experience that they're going to have on that third defensive pairing, the amount of talent. Simashev showed last season that he wasn't quite ready to go full-time in the NHL. How has that changed this offseason? What has he done to prove that he is ready? And I think the same thing can be said about Maverick Lamoureux. This is a guy that's been in the pipeline for quite a while. I want to say he was drafted in 2022, so we're stepping into year 4, year 5 of him in the pipeline. Has he reached the point where he's ready to make that jump? And according to Bill, we talked to him earlier today, he is expecting those guys to really push hard and to come in and to make things competitive. But for me, amongst those 4, I think there's still a little bit of concern of, how good and how deep is your defense going to be. Their top 4, super solid, right? You've got Uyghur, you've got Sergachev, you've got Schmidt, you've got Marino, but you get into that bottom pairing, and I think there's some question marks about depth.
How big is it for guys like Simashev and Boot, to come up last year and get a taste? Not play a ton, but come up and get a feel for it. Does that help them this year? Yeah,
it's huge. It's all part of the process. I mean, I think anytime that you can get a prospect, quality NHL minutes and they get a taste for what it takes, it's always going to benefit them because, these are really good players. I mean, these are guys that, were, very, very good over in the KHL. They were high first-round picks, and they both excelled in the AHL last year. I mean, these are guys who were borderline all-stars who were putting up, a lot of points and were making an impact down in Tucson. But, they came up to the NHL, and it was a bit of a rude awakening at times. It's a faster game. It's a more physical game. And, so I think for them, it was good for them to learn that. And now, with the full off season ahead of them, opportunity to put in the work and to train with the right guys and to get their bodies right and to get their minds right, it's only going to do them, a lot of good as they can now fully prepare. And, based on where they are in terms of their progress, in terms of how many years they've been in the pipeline, these guys should, for me, I think Simashev should be making that opening day roster. Boot, I think, should be pushing for it and at least should be spending a good amount of time in the NHL. But yeah, I think, like I said, anytime you can get quality minutes for those young prospects, it's only going to help them, measure themselves from, where they are and where they need to be.
Cole Bagley joining us, NHL Hockey Mammoth Insider right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone and KSLSports.com. When you have high-level draft picks like Denoyer or Iginla, is there pressure once you bring them up that they have to stay up, or do you still feel comfortable moving them up and down a little bit? And when I say that, do you hesitate bringing them up, realizing that there might be a chance you might move them down, or do you want to get them up there and make sure that they're in a situation where they're good enough where they can stay up there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're saying. I think a lot of it, I'm sure a lot of it goes back to the mentality, right? You don't want to, hurt those guys' confidence, but it's all part of the process. I mean, how many guys, that are currently on the Mammoth roster, were ready to play for an NHL team day one? Very few. And even of those, that were, they had to spend some times in junior leagues and in the AHL and what have you. I mean, if you think about Dylan Guenther, this is a guy who, he just scored 40 goals in the National Hockey League. Well, he's only played 2 full seasons in the NHL because the previous year, the last season in Arizona, he didn't make the opening day roster, and he was actually pretty upset about it. I've talked to him about, what that process was like, but what he did is, and management basically told him, prove to us that you're ready, force your way onto this roster. So he went down to the AHL. He scored a boatload of goals. He proved himself. They pulled him up, and, right now he's one of the best, shooters in the National Hockey League, and he's probably on one of the best bargain contracts in the league. And I think if you look at, an example of a guy like Josh Doan, who obviously is no longer with the organization, but, he had kind of a similar thing where that last season in Arizona, the Coyotes were not going to make the playoffs, so they gave, Josh a run at the end of the year. I think he played 12 games. He played incredibly well. He made the opening day roster, during the inaugural season, but then he struggled a bit. And so, while he may have thought he was ready and the organization kind of gave him an opportunity to show that, it wasn't so. And so they had to send him back to the AHL. He went down there. He was an all-star for the Tucson Roadrunners. He proved himself, came back up to the NHL, and he hasn't looked back. And he signed himself a nice contract with Buffalo, this last year. So I don't think that. I mean, obviously that there is a. You have to be careful, right? I mean, there are guys who it's going to hurt their confidence, but I think for most of these players, especially first-round picks, they're so hungry that if they get set back, well, then they're just gonna they're gonna do whatever it takes to get back up into the league. And so for guys like Caleb Denoyer and TJ Ginla, it'll be a good test. Training camp will be a really good test for them to show and to prove are they ready to steal a job? That's exactly the challenge that Bill Armstrong has given them. If they're ready, they can start day one. They can be on the opening day roster, but it doesn't end there. They have to keep proving themselves, which I think is a good place to have your young prospects, your young kids, be in.
Did anybody help themselves as much as the Mammoth in the offseason in the West? I'm kind of looking through it, and it seems like the Mammoth did as much as improvement as anybody, but I would lean on your expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Sharks are trying to take another step. They've realized that they've got an absolute generational talent in a guy like Macklin Celebrini, and they just weren't close enough last year to close the gap and get into the playoffs. And so I think that they've made some moves. I don't know that they've done anything that's going to make them a legitimate threat in the playoffs, but they may have closed the gap enough to make that push and to get into the postseason. Just kind of looking over the rest of the teams. I mean, I think the top dogs haven't done a lot because they're not really.
Yeah, they just held serve.
So.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Colorado is not in a position to get better. The Vegas Golden Knights not really in a position to get better. The Dallas Stars not in a position to really get that much better. We'll see, if anything ends up happening with Robertson, if they're able to trade him. But yeah, I think that as far as the West goes, if you look at the teams and what Utah's been able to do, I'd say that they're a team that has certainly taken this offseason as seriously as possible, and they've had some really solid additions that should only further their chances to not only get back to the playoffs, but like I talked about earlier, I think that they have done enough to really put themselves in a position to win at least a series next spring.
Well, we appreciate your time, Cole. Thanks for hanging out with us, man. Looking forward to catching up with you again down the line, but appreciate you willing to be able to join us on a moment's notice. This John Marino thing certainly was a big deal, and as this roster continues to come together, October can't get here quick enough.
Yeah, it should be a fun year. Every season we've gone back, Utah's just continued to improve, and so it's getting more and more exciting, more and more fun as management and the team they've taken it seriously. I mean, this is a team that's they're not just here to play hockey games, they're here to win hockey games and eventually lift a Stanley Cup. So we'll see what they're capable of.
Let's go. Thanks, Cole. Appreciate it.
Thanks, boys.
There he is, Cole Bagley, KSL Sports and 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, NHL Mammoth Insider. Does a tremendous job.
Everything I've looked at, I really do. I think you look at the Blackhawks, and they've tried to add something around Bedard, but I really do think he mentioned San Jose. Anaheim didn't do a ton. I think the Mammoth have done more with more.
Yes.
They already had a great team, but I think they've addressed all the rough edges and concerns. I'm excited to see this group now. It's all got to transpire on the ice, right? We were all excited about Peterka, and as Bill said, sometimes it just doesn't fit. So hopefully everything clicks.
All right, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. We'll talk some Washington Huskies coming up at 1:05. We'll also spin the wheel, a little sports roulette coming up at 1:30. It's all straight ahead. This is 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.